Welcome, everybody. Greg Peterson coming to you from the urban farm in the heart of Phoenix, Arizona. Today, we're with Kari Spencer. Kari is a popular gardening and homesteading speaker. As a master gardener and a master farmer, she enjoys sharing her passion for growing and raising food with others. In addition to teaching classes all over the city of Phoenix, she is the creator of Urban Farm U's Growing Food the Basics and Backyard Livestock courses. Kari and her family operate the Microfarm Project, a small farm in North Phoenix where she derived the inspiration for her book, City Farming, How-To Guide to Growing Crops and Raising Livestock in Urban Spaces. Welcome, Kari.
Thank you, Greg.
Love it that we're doing this yet again. Thank you so much for all your great work.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And this is a topic that I'm really excited about teaching.
Oh, I know that. And you're passionate about it, too. So we're going to be talking about urban farms in balance today, integrating animals and insects and microbes in your living farm system. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to you, and let's go.
Well, as Greg said, I'm Kari Spencer from the Microfarm Project. This is my family on our farm. This picture was taken a number of years ago. My kids are all grown up, and I'm older, but that's us. Okay, what are we going to cover today? We're going to be talking about what a farm needs. So if you're starting an urban farm, or any kind of farm really, if you're out in the country and have acres and acres, or if you just have a backyard or a small area where you will be producing food, then you can call it a farm. And we'll be talking about what any farm needs, whether it's big or small. We'll talk about what farm labor typically looks like, and then we'll contrast the normal farming methods and the normal ways that we think about farming with permaculture farming. And permaculture, that may or may not be a new term to you. If it's new, Google it, look it up. It's a fascinating topic, but basically it just means working with nature, working hand in hand with nature to make our systems better, to make things more productive, and to make things easier. We'll also be talking about putting animals, insects, and microbes to work in a permaculture farm system. Okay, let's start with what do farms need? Well, if you're going to grow food, you've got to have healthy soil. We've got to have nutrients in that soil. We often call these nutrients fertilizers. They're also amendments, things that provide the soil with the nutrients that plants need to grow and be healthy. Farms need pest control. Okay, if you are growing food or producing food or you have animals, then pests will come around. What do we do with the pests? Farms also need pollination. We cannot grow vegetables, most of them, at least the flowering vegetables, we can't grow them without some pollination. Farms need waste management. That's true if you are growing a garden, you're going to have some waste. What do you do with that? But it's also true if you have animals, even more so, I would say. Farms need odor control, especially if you're an urban farm. If you're out in the country and you have no neighbors who are going to smell your odors, then, not a big problem. But if you live in the city, then odor control is important because we don't want to be an annoyance to our neighbors. Additionally, physical labor is needed on a farm. And a farm needs profit. And whether that is a financial profit or whether that just means that you have some abundance of food to add to your kitchen or pantry resources, things that you don't have to go shop for, that's profit too. There are many ways to define profit, but a farm needs profit. Obviously, we're doing it to gain something. Whatever that is the profit. And a farm needs support, especially an urban farm needs support. We need to have neighbors who are happy about us. We need to have laws and rules and HOA guidance, things that will support us in our urban farming efforts. And farms need enjoyment. If it's no fun and it just becomes work and drudgery, then that's no way to live. But urban farming can be a real blast. Let me tell you, it is a lot of fun. Now, if we are designing our farms well, thinking about things in advance, thinking things through, making connections, then our good farm design should meet these needs in the easiest, most ecologically healthy, and most sustainable ways that also will maximize the abundance that is produced. That's exciting. However, sometimes good design can be hindered by just the way that we are trained to think about where things should go and how things should connect and how things should operate just by living in a city. And, you know, it's not a bad thing, I don't think, to have things nice and neat in a city. When you're living with a lot of neighbors, you might live in a neighborhood that looks like this picture where the lawns are nice and neat, the houses are nice and neat, everything's in its place. And there is a reason for that because we're all living together, so, you know, we want to make things comfortable for everyone. However, we can definitely bend the rules on that and create a pleasant space that's nice for us and our neighbors, but that doesn't have to fit into all of these boxes. Okay, we're really trained to think in terms of separating everything out into its own spot. We're trained to arrange everything in clearly delineated sectors. Okay, we have grid mapping, which I don't think is a bad thing. It's a great thing, but we also have, you know, waste management rules. This is where your waste needs to go. We have landscape borders. We have just, you know, ways that we think about here's where the trash is, here's where the living space is, here's where the garden is, and we tend to kind of separate everything into its spot. Now, we expend a lot of energy keeping things neat and tidy. As an example, in a neighborhood near mine that has an HOA, all the bushes are trimmed to look like gumdrops. And I don't know why that shape is so, people love that shape for bushes. I don't know, but it takes a lot of effort. They have to have somebody come out every week, trim those bushes to look like these gumdrops, right? So we're kind of trained to think that way of keeping everything neat. Keep your lawn ½ inch in height or an inch in height. Keep everything, no weeds, everything nice and neat. And there are reasons for it because we are all living together in cities and urban spaces. But at the same time, some of these things can really take a lot of energy to keep them nice and neat like that. So we also are trained to purchase products and services to meet our needs. As an example, chemical fertilizers. We're taught to go get those chemical fertilizers. We're taught if you need something, you just go to the big box store and grab it. Instead of thinking through, what do I already have? What can I use that's already on my property, already on my farm, to meet the needs that my farm has? So we're going to talk about these things and how we can kind of break these rules and make things better and function more efficiently. Because the model where everything is nice and neat and we go to the store when we need something results in big expenditures of effort and money. Lots of inputs are required. Inputs are things that we bring onto our farm from the outside. You know, at our house, we had goats and we had to bring in lots of hay. That's an input. It also requires lots of labor. This is a picture here of my daughter weeding. For some reason, when we put the lawn in at our house, we put this little border next to the patio full of rocks, and the Bermuda grass just grew right into that, and it was a pain because we hadn't thought through the lawn to patio system very well. We didn't take into account that the Bermuda grass was invasive and it was going to grow right into that border. So that required a lot of work to maintain. And there can be lots of labor when we follow the nice, neat model. But despite how urban farming is often presented as sort of an idyllic situation where everything's happy and natural and everybody's just smiling and the sun's shining, you know, in reality, if we don't think carefully when we're putting our farms together, we can have some negative outcomes as well. We can have costs that exceed income. Okay, we can have expenses that are high. We can have work that outpaces the fun that we might have. We have neighbors who might get upset. And sometimes there's so much work that burnout can ensue. We don't want that. We want our farms to be fun and productive and not causing us to burn out. And there is a solution, and it's all about relationships. It's about taking all those separate pieces that we've separated into boxes and thinking about how we can connect them in beneficial relationships. Okay, it's sort of like how a forest works. So if you took an ecology class in school, or maybe you just learned about ecosystems in your science classes, you know, an ecosystem such as a forest may appear at first to be a chaotic array of vegetation and rocks and insects and falling leaves and debris and wildlife and all the things that are in the forest. And it looks, you know, kind of chaotic, just random. But upon closer inspection, we know that an ecosystem has to have a complex self-sustaining system. Okay? A forest can take care of itself without having somebody coming in and raking the leaves and, you know, making sure that all the waste is removed. Nobody has to come in and fertilize the trees. The forest does all the things that it needs, and it functions like our human body as a whole, separate parts that function together as a whole. So a forest ecosystem meets most of its own needs. Okay, it does get some inputs from outside. Energy from the sun has to come from the outside. Air and water in the form of rainfall comes from the outside, or water that comes through a creek or a bubbling spring. Okay, these come from outside the system. But it maintains in-house its food webs, shelter for the wildlife that lives there, water filtration, waste recycling. When something dies, it is recycled into the system. When an animal produces waste, fecal matter, urine, those things are broken down and returned to the system. Fallen leaves, dead plants, all of this is recycled back into the system. The forest maintains its own pest control, reproduction, etc., and so forth. And our farm can function a lot like a living organism like the forest. Okay, when we start thinking about how the elements can be connected and interrelated and not separated, how different elements on our farm can support each other's needs. So the elements are the things that your farm has, its assets. Okay, so the plants, the trees, the people, the buildings, everything. Those are the elements on your farm, and they can support each other's needs. And farm processes can mirror patterns in nature to create the most sustainable and productive systems possible. I'll give you an example of a simple permaculture system that we implemented on our farm. The humble chicken. You know, not known to be a spectacular animal, and yet they are truly spectacular. What does a chicken need? Well, a chicken has to have food and water because it's a living animal. Okay, chickens also need grit, which are little rocks and stones that they use to grind up their food since they don't have teeth. They need dirt. They like to roll in the dirt to clean their feathers. They need shelter. They need security, protection from predators. They need social interaction. They need each other. Occasionally, they need some first aid, and they need exercise and something to do. They're always active, and they want to be active. One option in the way that, before I started doing this kind of farming, the way I thought about what a chicken coop would look like would be just to have a coop, a building where the chickens lived, and a fenced-in run where they could go outside, and everything kept in that coop and that run. And, you can do that. If you do and you keep them sequestered from the rest of your property, then you have to provide a lot of bagged feed and treats. You have to provide grit and maybe a sandbox or a dirt bath for them. You got to provide them chicken toys because they got to have something to do. They need bedding and a large run, all these things that are on this list, fly control, climate control, all these things. But this system is very one-sided because the farmer is doing all the work. Okay, the farmer's got to bring in the food. The farmer's got to make sure the climate control is right. The farmer's got to clean. The farmer's got to do it all. And the true value of the chicken is wasted because what are chickens good at? We start thinking about them as an asset. Well, we know they're good at producing eggs and meat. A lot of us keep chickens because we want eggs and or meat. They're really good at foraging and eating. Okay, they can forage and eat all day long. Just do that all day long. Just hunt for bugs, hunt for worms, hunt for something to eat. They love to scratch and dig. They're really good at producing manure. And they produce feathers. And they're great at providing entertainment. They're so fun to watch. If you've never sat and just kind of watched some chickens roaming around, they're hilarious. So the value of your chicken, wow, they produce eggs and meat, food, but also their eggs. The egg shells are full of calcium. That's good for humans. It's good for the chickens, and it's good for gardening. They can produce bone broth, and they can provide bone meal and blood meal for a garden. They're great at foraging and eating. So what can they do? They can help to eliminate scrap waste material. We put them in our compost bed. They help to break down the compost materials. They're great at weed control. Okay, they'll go around and they'll find weeds to eat in your garden, little tender shoots that are coming up in the soil. They'll find them and they'll take care of them. And they're great at pest control in the garden and in livestock pens. So we would let them go for a little while in our gardens under supervision. So they wouldn't eat everything. And we'd let them into our livestock pens to help to manage any pests that decided they wanted to take up residence, flies in particular in the livestock pens. They love to dig around and find fly larvae, and they would take care of the larvae readily. Okay, chickens are great at scratching and digging, so they're really helpful with garden prep. You put some chickens on a garden bed that you haven't planted yet, and they'll scratch through that. They'll take care of any weeds that pop up, and they'll poop in it and fertilize it as well. They're really great for helping in the compost pile and in livestock pen management. As I mentioned, they love to find fly larvae. They're great at producing manure, which is super as a fertilizer, and a compost activator. They produce feathers, which we can use for crafts and feather meal, and of course, entertainment. And this is just a short list of the things that a chicken is good for. If you think creatively about it, there's probably an unlimited value to the chickens that you might have on your farm. Now, chickens as composters, we're going to look at that one thing that they do and see how it can fit into a system. Hens, gardens, and compost bins and even the kitchen are interrelated. Okay, I used to keep my compost and my chickens all kind of separate. And I also had scraps from the kitchen that I would throw away. But when I thought about my chickens and what they could do, I would give the chickens compost items from the kitchen that I really didn't want to put in my compost pile. So things that might have some meat in them, chickens can eat that. Whereas I wouldn't necessarily put something with meat in it directly into a compost pile. Okay, so the chickens are the mediator. They eat the meat and then they poop it into the compost pile. That works well. When you incorporate chickens into your composting, the chickens can go into the compost pile. They can help to turn it and aerate it. They activate it with the bacteria that's in their poop, and they help to eat and break down materials really, really quickly. Then we can take that compost and we can put that into our garden beds, and it's really active, after the chickens have been in there. There's lots of nutrient that's there, and our soil will improve, and our plants will get better, bigger, stronger, and bigger harvests. So we'll have lots of food. Maybe because of that compost, we'll have a lot of excess food. Where can that excess food go? Well, some of it can go back to the chicken. And then the chickens, go into the compost pile, and it's a circle. You see how this works? Chickens in the compost in the garden materials back to the chickens as feed. Now, when we do that, I don't have to buy as much store-bought feed because my chickens can eat waste from the garden and they can eat some produce from the garden because I will have extra. My fertilizer costs are reduced because the chickens are doing the fertilizing. Composting's easier. Pests are eliminated. If there's roaches in my compost, I'm not really opposed to having them there, but the chickens will make sure they don't get out of control. Livestock pens are easier to maintain. Landfill waste is reduced because that stuff is all being eaten and or composted by the chickens. The eggs are higher quality because those chickens are eating a better diet, a more well-rounded diet. The chickens are happier, gardens are healthier, and so on and so on and so on. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to think about the value of the things that we already have. Okay, and it is often much greater than what we are trained to see. Okay, if I think of a chicken as just an egg producer, I am missing out on the abundance that chicken can provide. And I'm also shortchanging the chicken. I'm giving it something to do that it is made to do, that it likes to do. And when I really think about it and how I can connect my chicken to the other aspects of my farm rather than separating them into their own coop and run, all the better. We had a coop and a run for sure, but we let those chickens out in the afternoon. We let them do their thing. We let them in the compost pile. In fact, we did the composting right in the chicken run. We let them out into the garden for a little while and into the livestock pens. And then at night, they would put themselves away because chickens go back to their roosting bars just naturally by instinct at night. So it was a great system, and those chickens were so wonderful on our farm. Okay. So when we start thinking in those ways, then really the value of things just expands and explodes in our mind and our consciousness. Most of this abundance is free and available if we are really willing to tap into it. Here's another example, a grapefruit tree. I love grapefruit, but when you have a grapefruit tree, there's only so many things, so many times you want to eat just a raw grapefruit. But our grapefruit tree, I discovered, can provide so much more than just a grapefruit with my breakfast in the morning. It could provide marmalade. It could make wonderful cleaners. Okay, we would put some grapefruit rinds in some vinegar, which you can see on the left here, and that would create cleaners that we could use in our house that were natural. I would dry the rinds and the white parts, the pith, the part that's really, really bitter. I would dry that stuff and grind it up and make grapefruit powder, which is full of vitamin C, and we could put that in our smoothies, and it was wonderful. I didn't have to buy vitamin C tablets. Okay. I found out that you can use grapefruit leaves for things. Just thinking through all of the things that you can do with grapefruit, it's so much beyond having a grapefruit with your breakfast. So if you have a grapefruit tree, wow, you can really create some amazing abundance from that. We candied grapefruit rinds. Those were so yummy. We made grapefruit vodka. We made grapefruit, all kinds of things. And we had a lot of fun with it, with that one grapefruit tree. So what I want you to do now, we've just barely scratched the surface of how to develop whole systems thinking. But I want you to begin with an easy assignment. I want you to go out onto your property, and I want you to think about what you already have. In fact, I encourage you to make a list. What do you have? I've got, as an example, at our house, I've got a shed. I've got a number of trees that I could put on the list. I have some space that is right now rock that I could use for something else. I have water spigots on both sides of my house, actually on 3 sides of my house. I've got a lemon tree in the neighbor's yard that hangs over my fence. We have dogs. We have birds that come and eat the dog food. And with every negative, there's always a positive. I want you to consider the value of each element. Okay, its characteristics, its benefits, how it could be employed on your farm, and list the obvious, but also try to think out of the box. And don't leave out negative characteristics. There's always a positive side to every negative. At our old farm, we had a big patio, and we had a mulberry tree right next to that patio. Loved, loved, loved that mulberry tree. But what I didn't love is the birds that will come and eat the mulberries and then poop purple on my patio and on my patio furniture. It's stained. It's just terrible. So I had to think about, gosh, what can I do? What can I do? So I would gather up mulberries, and we took them out and put them in a feeder that was under a tree on our property. Okay, now the birds could go to that feeder, and we also put some other things that birds like in that feeder, and they could poop all they wanted under that tree because that was a great place for them to poop because it provided fertilizer for that little tree. Poop was not a bad thing. It was bad on my patio, but it was great in the yard. So I just had to think about how to get them to go out there. I also did things to make my patio less inviting for the pigeons so that they would go out there instead of hanging out on my patio. And so I had to think this through. It seemed like a negative. I didn't like those pigeons, but I figured out something that was useful for them. And the problem actually became a solution. Okay, the problem gave me fertilizer for a small tree. So grab all your elements, put them down on paper, think about their characteristics. What can they do? What's their value? What do they need? And then connect the dots. Got to start thinking about how can these elements support each other. Okay, I had pigeons that were eating mulberries and pooping on the patio. Not great. But when I thought about how I could connect those pigeons to an element on my farm where it could be useful, then I was able to come up with a solution. Was it perfect? No. Sometimes the pigeons would still poop on the patio. But for the most part, they were going out there and eating and being a benefit to the little tree that I had planted. So that's your assignment. You're going to have a bonus presentation that will walk you through some living examples of how this worked on our farm, how it could work on any farm. I know you might have a lot of questions about this. When you first start thinking about it, it's kind of mind-blowing and it's hard to get your mind around. But once you start putting it into practice, it's actually quite easy once you develop that habit of whole systems thinking.
Yay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So one of the things that I always like to include in your observation, and I've gotten a lot of value, not just out of my property, because my property's connected to the neighborhood.
Yes,
So
definitely.
one of the things that I do is I look to see how my property can be interacting with the neighbors' properties. And for me, that one of the things that looks like is that I've convinced 4 of my neighbors every fall when the leaves fall on the ground, they rake them and they bring them to me in bags.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And
Yeah.
I'll give you another example of this. Our friend Heather was managing a nursery, a children's nursery, not a plant nursery. She was managing their garden. And they had a dumpster, but it could only hold so much waste. So they were going to have to pay extra to get rid of waste from this really big garden. Instead of her putting it in the dumpster, she put it in piles. I bagged it, I took it home, and I fed it to my animals.
Oh, perfect.
Reduced my feed costs and saved them money and kept stuff out of the landfill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Well, let's jump into questions.